Hi, everyone. Welcome to this author talk with Dr. Robert Barner. My name is Dr. Jaime Goff, and I am an executive coach and leadership consultant and owner of the Empathic Leader, LLC. And I recently had the privilege of receiving an advanced copy of Working Deeply, Transforming Lives Through Transformational Coaching by Dr. Robert Barner and Dr. Kennedius. Both of whom have decades of experience in leadership development and executive coaching. In Working Deeply, Barner and Kennedius suggest that coaching clients sometimes use executive coaching to move well beyond behavioral change to engage in deep transformational learning. Their book provides an applied approach supporting such transformational change. As an executive coach myself, who's always interested in furthering my knowledge of the field, I was thrilled when Dr. Barner agreed to an interview about his most recent book. And so thank you so much, Dr. Barner, for spending this time with me today to talk about your book. How would you summarize Working Deeply in a few sentences? Tell us a little bit about this most recent book of yours.
Sure. Well, the focus for the book is to help coaches understand the psychological and interpersonal dynamics that occur whenever a client is shifting from a behavioral level, the types of behaviors they want to change, to something more deep, which is taking a second look at who they are and how they operate in the world. And so to do that, what we try to do is we try to put together a series of theories, concepts, applied learnings, research, to help the coach move through the process and understand what they can do to support transformational learning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. And, I know I've talked with you and sat in your classes and learned so much from you as a professor in executive coaching. How would you describe Working Deeply as being different, or what does Working Deeply offer that perhaps some other books on executive coaching don't offer? What does it add to the field?
Well, first of all, there are a host of really good books on coaching out there. I incorporate a lot of them in teaching and training. Yes. What Ken and I tried to do, was focus on an often neglected area of coaching, which is what happens in deep learning within the coaching process. So our process in our book are really for coaches who understand how to do contracting, how to build rapport, how to engage with the client's manager, all the basics and foundational pieces. But when you go beyond all of that and you're working with a client who is actually using the process for self-discovery, that's what we wanted to tackle, and that's not being covered very much. The second thing is that we have a very good research base. So between Ken and myself, we have about 70 years of applied experience in corporate. But we wanted to make it more than that. So we folded in about 70 research studies that we think provide high value. And we tried to weave together seminal concepts. For example, what does research on mindfulness tell us about use of self in coaching? What does research about our ability to visualize ourselves in the future, our future constructions, say about how we structure our life stories and narratives? So these are some of the things that we folded in. We think the third major difference is the book has cross-cultural applicability. Now, find cases of a leader in China, a leader from the Mideast, a leader from South Africa. And to test the book, when we get through with it, we put the rough manuscript out to people from the UK, the US, Sweden, India, Israel, South Africa, several more countries. And we asked one basic question: do these concepts ring true to you and leaders within your culture? And we got a resounding yes. So we're very excited about that.
That's great. So it sounds like, as you've talked about what's different about the book, this book is really, in some ways, targeted for coaches, like you said, who have kind of all of the basic foundational skills in place, but they're looking to go a little bit further with those clients who are interested in doing that and who are willing to do that. And I really love, having read the book myself, and as an academician, I really love the way in which the two of you incorporated that research, because what you're really saying is these aren't just our ideas about what might work, but we know based on research that these techniques and these ways of working with people really are impactful. And so I just really appreciated that. Yeah. Yeah. In the book, you talk about 3 levels or access points into coaching. And so you talk about, the first level being giving advice, the second level being encouraging insight and self-reflection, and then the third level, which the book really focuses on, which is facilitating that transformational learning. So based on your experience and your opinion, what qualities do you think a coach should have already? What qualities should they possess to be able to move kind of within and between these 3 levels and to really be able to take their clients to that transformational learning level?
I think there are a couple things. First of all, they have to exude a high level of warmth, trust, and intimacy, because this is what I call close quarter work. As you go from the marrow from the skin to the marrow of the person, from what they're doing in a day-to-day basis as a leader to examining questions that are a little bit closer to the core of who they are and how they see themselves. Trust is on the table. And we don't give trust to someone unless we can see their human face. So that's one. I think the second thing is summed up in the word presence. And we talk a lot about mindfulness recently, but really what does that mean? To me, it means being engaged fully, not in your head, but in the room with the client, so that you can notice small, subtle shifts on the part of the client. A heavy sigh, a restatement of something that lets you know that there's an emotional shift going on that tells you that person is struggling with something at a deeper level. And we miss that if we're in our head or we're working with our notes. And maybe the last thing would be an ability to alter your approach. We're very comfortable in working with facts and working with behavior and working with organizational data. But what about the metaphors? What about the symbols? What about the life stories, narratives that the client brings to bear? And some clients have never really worked with these. So we try to provide in our book some context and a bit of a practice for coaches to get a little bit more in-depth work within these areas. So those are qualities and maybe skills that are appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just, really that comfort in the coach to move beyond maybe what are the surface level behavioral types of goals that probably were set at the beginning, and maybe even why you came into the coaching engagement, but being able and willing and comfortable with going to that deeper emotional level, it sounds like is really important, and having that trustworthiness. So,
exactly. You know it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you talk about this in the book as well. There are numerous points within the book where you mention the importance of the coach's use of self, which is kind of essentially what you're talking about here. And you define in the book use of self as self-awareness and understanding how the coach is simultaneously affecting and being affected by the client during the coaching session. And it's the ability to manage one's own attention, energy, behavior, and emotional reactivity. So based on your experience, what does it look like in a coaching session when a coach is positively engaging his or herself in the process?
Sure. Well, let's take part of what you've talked about, which is being trained. I think that there's a fantasy on the part of some coaches that being professional people were sealed in a magic block of amber and we're not affected by the client. We do stuff to the client, but we don't really get affected with the client. And I tell coaches that when you're in your best, coaching is not something you do with a client, it's something you do with the client. And so what happens is our vulnerability increases a little bit if we're in the room in the moment with the client. So Ken and I have a belief that at some point, everything a client is working with out there in the organization is going to be brought in here in the coaching situation. It will be replicated at some point. Once we get past the honeymoon period and clients relax into the coaching process, start worrying less about how they come across as a performance issue, and really begin to reveal most of themselves. So, for example, a client who's been told that they tend to be condescending and arrogant, I think you can expect them to present that to you as a coach. They may make a snide comment or be a little disdainful of something. Now, there's a choice we have at that moment. I think bad use of self is we try to be professional. We a poker face as best we can, and we we marshal on and we continue as if it didn't happen. But recent studies have shown that we have a remarkable ability to pick up on subtle emotional shifts on the part of the other person, and we do it in a fraction of a second. So the client sees something with us that's shifting, sees that we're uncomfortable, and they say, well, what's wrong? And we say, well, nothing's wrong. And now the client knows we're being inauthentic. So we're trying to get them as a leader to become more authentic as a leader, but we're not modeling that. And where does that emotion go? Where does that frustration about being treated in a disdainful or dismissive fashion go? And I think we carry that with us, and it muddles up the dynamic of ourselves with the client. So we become reactive to the client. Now, a good use of self means we're not reactive. We're responsive. And what that means is, what I would do in that moment when the client says something disdainful is I'd put my pen down and I'd say, I want to pause because something important just happened. I want you to stop and pay attention to what you just did just now and what that means in terms of our interaction and how it affected me. And you explain it. And the clients say, what's the big deal? And that's your learning opportunity to say, the big deal is it's related to some of the things that brought you into coaching. You remember we talked about this. This is a replication of that, and I'm trying to get your attuned to it. So use of self means that we become an incredibly good reflective mirror for both for the client and for the emotionality that's happening inside of us.
Yeah, it does. It does. So, I mean, in many ways, if you're positively using yourself as the coach, you're willing and able to do some of the same things that you're asking your client to do in terms of being open and honest and vulnerable and aware of your emotional responses and acknowledging those rather than just kind of stuffing it under the rug or avoiding having the difficult conversation.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're like a swim coach who walks around the side of the pool but never gets in.
I was wondering about those coaches and gym teachers.
Into the water with a client.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. In chapter 3 of the book, you talk about several stumbling blocks to growth for leaders. And it was really helpful to see those stumbling blocks identified there. Based on your experience, which of those stumbling blocks seems to be the most difficult for coaches to help their clients overcome? And like, what's one strategy that you might recommend to coaches for overcoming that stumbling block?
Sure. I think when it comes down to it, the biggest stumbling block is that the closer we get to learning that deals with and confronts and challenges how I see myself, my self-concept, the more we have a deflection shield that pushes away from it. So if you turn around and you say, Bob, you have a spot on your shirt, that's a data fact. I can accept that. If you say something to me that challenges the way I feel about myself as a leader, a coach, a person, then I'm going to start that deflection process. And yet that deflection, getting through that deflection process is the only way we learn. So how do we pull down the barriers? That's the biggest thing we all have. You, I, fellow coaches everywhere, and clients. So what do coaches do to help in that? I think they balance two things. I think they put enough support on the table that the client feels that they're in a safe place. We talk about creating a safe holding space to hold the client's story so that story can emerge without disruption. So that's one. But at the same time, you have to be what I call supportively confrontational. That means if the client says something in that process of that story, which is inconsistent, we don't attack it, but we hold it up and say the mirror is fractured at this point. These two things don't make sense. For example, for weeks, a client's been telling you how much pressure they're under, how stressed they are at work, how they're trying to achieve better life balance. And now in this situation, a client jumps in, they're very happy, and they say, I have an opportunity for a great promotion. It's going to mean extra hours. It's going to mean more pressure. It's going to be far more demanding, but look at the money I'll make. So I think what we do as coaches is we say, help me understand the story that you've been telling to this point about wanting to have better work-life balance and being so stressed. And does that match up with the goal that you're now putting out for yourself? How do you put these two things together? So it's support married with appropriate challenge and confrontation.
Oh, yeah. And to be able to do that well, you have to, like you said, you have to create that safe space for your clients where they are open to those challenges when you offer them. Yeah.
Yes. And that's why the challenge comes out in that situation, not as this doesn't make sense because earlier you said this, which isn't a deflection shield comes in.
Right.
It comes into, I'm having trouble understanding how this lines up with this. And then you place it gently on the table and you back away. Client tell you. Yeah.
So it's still, even though you may be challenging them a bit, it's still very much up to them to interpret, to give meaning to that, essentially.
Absolutely. And you turn around and as a means of opening up again, sometimes you might turn around and say, you've also mentioned you've gotten feedback on this, not only from your boss, but on your spouse or your partner. Maybe you back and just share this story and this goal that you have and just get their reflection on it. They can give, I'm giving reflection as a coach, but they can give you another perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things, and you mentioned this earlier, that the book really is interested in people's life stories and the narratives that they live their lives by. And in the book, the two of you talk about the damage that can be caused by global labels that are placed on clients. So things like passive aggressive and, this person's a micromanager, they're an introvert, or they're resistant to change. What strategies can coaches use to avoid labeling our clients? How can we avoid kind of buying into the label that we hear that's been placed on them in the organization?
Yeah. Well, first, let's talk about what labels do. Labels are related to a process called essentialism, which is kind of a position that basically says you believe that there are certain things that are baked into a person. They're essential to who a person is. When we use labels as a coach, when we buy into labels, we get people to place our clients in little seal-type boxes that says, you are a micromanager, or you are passive-aggressive. They steal the box up, and they say everything you are is like that. The client pounds on the inside of the boxes, and the box doesn't allow any room for growth. It basically says everything you are as a human being is part of this label. One of the things that the coach can do is speak to the part of the person that is very amenable to change. And the way we do that is a process we call unpacking. Unpacking means taking a label and breaking it down to something we can see and observe. So let's take that label of passive aggressive. Instead of saying passive aggressive, we say, what does the person do to make you think they're passive aggressive? Well, they tend to avoid conflict. Okay, let's work with those words. They tend to avoid conflict. And we mean by that when they need to confront other people, they're hesitant to do it. Well, perhaps that's because they've never been trained in conflict management strategies. They simply lack the interpersonal skills to know how to do that. So why don't we use that as a starting point for a discussion and throw a label on people and objectify them?
Yeah, it's much easier to help people gain new skills, like in conflict management, for example, than it is to work with a passive aggressive person. Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing is, we have to be careful about language because we use a label in a casual tone, and next thing you know, it's in an HR report. It's in somebody's personal file. It's on their performance review. The manager picks it up and carries it through the organization. So I'm very, very careful about how I use language as a coach.
Yeah, because we have the power to some extent as coaches to begin changing the language that's used to describe our clients in the organization if we're very careful about that, like you said.
Exactly right.
One of the things that you talk about in the book too is vulnerability, and we've already touched on that to some extent. And vulnerability is kind of a hot topic right now. There are a lot of people writing about it and talking about, how important it is to be more vulnerable. And you talk about how vulnerability is a necessity for deep transformational change and learning. How have you seen a willingness to embrace vulnerability be a catalyst for transformational change, both in individuals and organizations?
It's a very, very strong catalyst for change because it's an opening up of who we are and how we have the potential to see ourselves. And as coaches, there are a couple of things we can do to help people get there. I mean, one of the things that Ken and I are a big believer on is the use of provocative questions. And by provocative questions, we mean questions that don't attack a person's belief system. They invite an inquiry into it. So let me digress and give you a little metaphor, and I'll come back. So the metaphor we use is that of a crab, a hermit crab. The hermit crab is its home on its shell, and it's very cool. But eventually it starts growing and gets too big for the shell, and parts of it stick out, and it's subject to predators. So it knows it has to scurry around and find a new home. But to do that, it has to leave its shell for a while. And it knows that that's a point of vulnerability. In order to survive and grow, it has to be vulnerable for a while. Now, we're like that. And the shell that we put on our back and we build over time are all of our belief systems about how the world operates and how we are in the world and who we are and what our values are. And sometimes, if we're not growing and letting new information, that shell becomes hardened and brittle and calcified and locks us in. Yeah. And we stop growing and we can die. The point is we have to release ourselves from the shell. Now, to do that, that's when we come to vulnerability. Provocative questions help with that. And provocative questions would be something like this. If I'm dealing with a client and it's the first session and they're resistant to coaching, and I want them to open up a bit, and they're sitting back like this, and they're not really sure about this coaching stuff, I'll let them tell me the story. I'll say, tell me the story of how you came into the organization, what your initial expectations are, and what that journey's been for you. And they do, story. And then I say, let me ask, you know yourself pretty well, and you understand your story pretty well. If nothing changes in the story, and continue as they are, and I leave and you don't go into coaching, how does the story end? And getting people to do that makes them realize the trajectory of where their life's going, and makes them realize that they're not only reading their life story and describing it, but they're also the author and the editor and the internal critic of their life story. And I've had more than once an aha occur at that point where a person begins to get that they have a choice in the room, and they can move forward and change and find another bigger shell or stay where they are.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's a powerful question.
It's a question that I think we should all ask ourselves. We all have a life story. How is our life story, the way it's progressing, going to actually end?
Yeah. Well, those are all of the questions that I had this morning, and thank you so much again for agreeing to engage in this interview. And like I said, I've read the book and greatly enjoyed it, and will be utilizing some of the tools and suggestions in my own coaching practice. And so I would encourage others to get a copy of the book and read it, and just learn from all the wisdom that both you and Dr. Adeas are, presenting us with as coaches. And the book is on Amazon, right? So people can get a copy of the book on Amazon if they want to purchase a copy of it. Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to share before we sign off today?
No. I want to thank you for the interview. This has been great. I love getting a story out. And yes, Ken and I were authors of the book, but everyone who endorsed the book also contributed. Well, we got it out. The hidden names behind the book were our clients. We asked several of our clients to review the manuscript and say, does this breathe life into your lived experience of transformational learning? Now, those people, because they were our clients, are unnamed. But if any of you are watching, thank you. Thank you so much for the incredible advice and suggestions you gave to make this a consolidated learning process. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Barner. And I hope this has been helpful to all of you that are watching and listening. And buy the book. It's great. It will improve your coaching practice. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.